as far as the evolution goes. So they really capture people's imaginations. And that's why the Crane Foundation has been so successful. They're located in North America with the whooping crane and the sandhills, but they're also located in Africa with different species, but in Europe, the common crane there, in Asia and Australia. But you might notice none in South America and none in Antarctica. So they're pretty widespread. And do you have to travel the world to see these cranes? And the answer is no. You can see them in just south of Wisconsin Dells near Baraboo. That's where the International Crane Foundation is off Highway 12. And all of those species you can find there in a, so you can travel there and see them in pens or in open air. They have all kinds of ways that they display them. This is George Archibald. And he and Ron Sowie created the International Crane Foundation in 1973. And he invites you to have your own crane experience. I've traveled with him 4 times: China, Vietnam, Bhutan, and Nebraska. And so we'll be taking a look at those places as well. So here's little George Archibald. This is from his book. He's playing with a duckling, and his first memory is playing with the duckling, and the second is feeding the duckling. And this is in Nova Scotia in Canada. He is Canadian. And he remembers getting angry with his father for the first time when he discovered the ducks he had been shot, or he had shot in hunting. And so he didn't hunt anymore for ducks. He has schooling is in Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. And he's majors, BS, Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry. And then he went to the famous Cornell Lab of Ornithology and got his doctorate there in 1971. He and a friend of his, Ron Sowie, both have their doctorates, and they're both interested in cranes. What in the world do you do with a doctorate in ornithology and then specializing in cranes? We'll find that out. By the way, My Life with Cranes is George Archibald's book. It's really good. It's available through Yankee Bookstore and other places. It makes a very interesting read. So here's George with Ron Sowie. And Ron is the one on the left as you're looking at your video screen. And unfortunately, I had traveled in 1985 to China with George, but I got to meet Ron a number of times. And I happened to be going down to Madison for some reason when I found out that he had died of a cerebral hemorrhage. And so I was able to stop in and at the funeral home and see him. Very young man, very talented, very smart. And George's co-founder and co-worker on the cranes now has passed away. So this is the first home. And one of the reasons why the Sowie family was so important was that Ron's father rented him, or those two, his farm. It was a horse farm, for $1 a year. And so this is the first place where the Crane Foundation was. They used the barns for storing some of the cranes, but it was really too small to do the things that they wanted to do. So the current operation is about 5 miles away, and it's in the Baraboo Hills. And you can see it's nicely wooded with some prairie area around it. And what you see up on the left hand of the screen is where the pods are, where the viewing sections are. And then on the right upper corner is Crane City. And that's where they're raising captive cranes, not imprinting them on human beings, but trying to imprint on their own kind so they can be released in nature. So I had to put a picture of this in because the Baraboo Hills of Sauk County, that's where my father's relatives all came from. It's the Lohr have a number of farms in this general area, and it is just beautiful. It's just gives you a hint of the beauty of this area. So this past year, they spent $10 million renovating the whole place, and God, they were going to open, in June, and now it's not until 2021. So I have pictures here of the construction. Well, this is the entrance to it. They have 5 activities: research, education, habitat protection, captive breeding, and reintroduction into nature. It's a significant tourist venue in the Wisconsin Dells area. And the past year, they had 25,000 visitors. And that's from April 15th to October 31st. It's usually fairly busy there. It's a short season. So it's become a major tourist destination, the Dells. It's really low key. You can go and see the birds in their own little enclosures and see what they look like. And then in some open areas where they have cranes, you can see how they behave out in nature. They have walks that you can go on, a prairie walk, on a pothole wetland area, and an oak savanna. So there's short walks that you can take in all those different kinds of ecosystems. And it's just, when you're at the Dells, you know how hectic and frantic that area is. You can take the kids here for, kind of mellow them down. This is a low key, but really educational visit. And there's basically what I was saying. It shows a little bit more of, they have a lot of water there because, of course, cranes like to live in a water environment. This is a new structure. There's going to be fence-free viewing. So you'll be able to see it in a little more novel fashion. And here you can see again, a few of those. In the circular pod, you can see all 15 species. And this is, I think there's 2 places, one in Germany and one here in our state, where you can see all 15 species of crane when you go to visit. And this is just kind of a map of the area, and the pod is shown in the middle, and some of the other exhibits off to the sides. And the cranes are listed on your left. So it's a nice place to visit. Down below here where you see the moose, that's a painting. And what they're doing with the fences is that they're putting these paintings on the mesh so that the crane has more of a feeling of being in nature. And when you view them, of course, that you will see nature around them where their species exist in nature. So here's the new George Archibald Visitor Center. I sent down, I emailed and I said, can you text me or email me some of the pictures of the newly remodeled Crane Foundation? They said, no, we can't, because we're having an opening next year and we want it to be a surprise for everybody. So you're seeing some of the construction pictures, but not the final thing here. So June 27th, 2020, the grand opening of the crane event. Now it's to open in 2021. I don't have the specific date, but we'll have to wait a whole year to see the new International Crane Foundation. So COVID really has played a role here, of course. So they have educational programs. Here you have a crowd listening intently to you have the whooping cranes wandering around out there, and you can view them while they're giving you a lecture. This is the crane man, George Archibald. I've gotten to know him really well after traveling 4 times with him. And I was on some of the first trips for the Crane Foundation. So he is on first name basis with many, many world leaders. And he gets cooperation from dictators. He goes into North Korea because the North Koreans love their cranes. And there isn't too many Americans, and they love them so much, they give them really good cooperation. And the farmers, of course, have to follow through. This is a real strict dictatorship. And but George can wander around looking at cranes in the fields and telling farmers they can do this or that to help the cranes. And it's pretty amazing. He's traveled the world, and he has been really successful in getting grants from big corporations, getting some money from governments. This Crane Foundation started as, you know, a horse farm in Baraboo Hills, and it's become a really genuine worldwide phenomena. So here's one of the early cranes, Tex. They thought Tex was a male until they developed some sexing tools where they found out Tex was really a female. And George was feeding him, and he found that Tex was imprinted on humans, and especially George. And so, you know, you put a male in with Tex and she wouldn't produce the eggs. So who takes her place? It's George, and he became really famous for this. He was the man who danced with cranes, and he's doing the male dance, and she's responding with the female response dance. It was just really, really got a lot of news back in the day. And here he lived with her for months. He lived in this little shack that was penned in so that he and Tex would be together from March through May when the egg laying season comes. And you know, here they're taking a little time off, just the two of them. And like any courting couple, George is trying to get her to lay an egg. And it's pretty phenomenal. It did lay an egg. But here he is with Johnny Carson. And he flew into New York. And he was staying overnight at a hotel. And he got a phone call from Baraboo, from the ICF. And they said raccoons had broken into the pen with Tex and killed it. And now he has to go on with Johnny Carson show, telling the story of Tex. So it probably would have been a much more fun and funny program, but he had a very sad tale to tell, and Johnny Carson was just really taken with the tell. You know, he was really interested in George's story, put it that way. So this is more like it. You know, you have a baby chick and it's imprinting on its own kind, on its parents. That's good. But they don't always have parents around. So you disguise the human form to look like a crane. And so they'll imprint on their own kind. This is a hand puppet. And well, this one is just their big bird, their big crane mascot that they use. They don't use that one to imprint the birds. But here you have fledglings that's newly born, following their human parents. And you can see they're all in white. And here they're teaching the young to forage. They have their hand puppets down into the grasses. They're pulling out sedge roots from the grasses, small animals, worms, and bugs, and whatever's growing in them. They're very omnivorous. They eat just about anything they can catch that, that has nutrients. And of course, we all know this one, the ultralight, teaching the young to migrate. The pilot out there is dressed in white, and here it was very successful for a while. It's no longer being done, but they did teach a number of cranes to fly from Wisconsin down to Florida. So the Crane Foundation goes into areas where the cranes are and listens to the local people, because cranes don't save cranes. It's people that save cranes. And in all of these localities, you get to know the villagers, the people, and you try to set it up so that they have a symbiosis with the cranes. They can work together. And they try to tell them that often tourists will come to see these cranes and they can make some money that way. But in general, they just try to work with the locals to let them, make them aware of the valuable resource they have in these cranes. So George is really good at this, bringing people together to solve problems. He has meetings of political leaders and village leaders and so forth. And so here he is talking to a very diverse group. And education is another big element. And that's not just here in the US, that's in all the various locations where the cranes are found. And eliminating dangers. You can see what might happen here with the electrical wires. They fly into them and break a wing or so, and they are so loyal. This is one of the things people admire about cranes. If one hits those wires and goes down and is critically injured, its mate will stand over that downed bird, sometimes until they die of starvation, but other times, you know, just you can see the bird mourning its mate, and especially Asian people find this very touching, very important. So we'll start with Siberian cranes. Siberian cranes have their nests and they lay their eggs up in the Russian tundra habitat. And that is a vast wetland. And they are wide spread out, so maybe one pair crane for every 50 square miles. I mean, Siberian, of course, is really, really large. And so when George wrote his book, he wrote it saying, cranes never get together in big groups. They are pretty much solitary couples, and there were 620 of them in existence. That was his original book. That's what he knew. So you can see here a 3,000-mile migration. The Chinese found out that the cranes wintered in Lake Boyang. And so they go from Siberia. Now you have to remember the fledgling, the chicks that were hatched have to grow during a couple months in the summer, big enough and strong enough and be strong enough flyers to fly 3,000 miles. Pretty amazing. And they flew Sikorsky helicopters around all over Siberia, trying to find cranes and then counting them. And here's 2 eggs. They usually do produce 2 eggs. And you can see this white bird putting, they have put clay on their backs so they are more camouflaged. When they see them in China, they are bright white. And there's a little fledgling and also an egg. But usually, the first one out or the stronger of the 2, once they hatch, will kick the other one out. So usually one chick survives. So there's a battle of the fittest right away in their lives to see which one of those. It's very rare for them to raise two chicks. So what are you going to do if you want to increase the number of cranes? George Archibald took one egg and placed it with a fake one. And that one just never hatched for the people, but now George has an egg, a fertile egg. So he takes them and he flies back to Baraboo, Wisconsin. You can see the eggs in a foam container here, very carefully made, so that they are not going to be damaged. And here he is on the long flight from the USSR, it was the Soviet Union at the time, to Baraboo, Wisconsin. And he's got his arm on the eggs. And so this is one great experiment. So George Archibald came to the UWMC in 1984. I had resigned from being a world history teacher at Wausau West and had purchased Pine Valley Golf Course. My parents, Joyce and I bought it from my parents. And I was looking for something to do in the winter. And my master's is a MST, Master in Science of Teaching, but I had a lot of classwork in East Asian history in the 20th century. So what was George's topic? He talked about the Soviet and People's Republic of China cooperating to save the Siberian crane. He said that Chinese ornithologists had discovered the winting grounds, and that was in Lake Poyang, deep in China. And he asked, are there any volunteers who want to go deep into China? Well, I got a big smile on my face. I popped up and I was at his side in no time. And I said, oh, I'll volunteer. And he said, are you an ornithologist? And I said, well, my knowledge of birds comes from my record and book from when I was young, Bozo and the Birds, which was really that was a really good childhood book and record. And I said, but now after watching you, I know what a Siberian crane looks like. And he said, well, anything else? And I said, well, I have the history of China, you know, in my coursework. He said, good, come along. So this is one of the first trips. We landed in Shanghai and took a 12-hour train ride overnight to Lake Poyang. And you can see the big blue area pointing at it. Actually, we landed in Nanchang and then went north into Poyang Lake. And this is in the winter. And so Poyang Lake dries out. The monsoon rivers, there's 5 rivers that feed into it, but they're monsoon rivers. When the monsoon is over, those rivers go almost down to nothing. And Lake Poyang empties out into the Yangtze, which is just to the north. And because of that, the leaves residual pools, and that's what the birds like. They like wading around in 12, 15-inch water and searching for fish and snakes and clams and of course the sedge roots and so forth who make their living in the winter. But cranes are revered in Asia. You know, it's just a symbol of good luck and authority, because the cranes adorn the throne rooms of the Chinese emperors. And one of the reasons it depicts rank is they call it the 3 longs. It has a long beak, it has a long neck, and it had long legs. And therefore, it's you know, admired for those qualities and also for its endurance. Cranes live a long time and fly tremendous distances. Excuse me. And at death, we all know that how we're delivered at birth. At death, the crane carries your spirit to heaven. So who can't love a bird that's going to carry to heaven? They don't have the stork bringing the babies, but they do have this myth. So we've mentioned before that they raise their chicks in Siberia during the summer. And this is in a vast wetland. And they have to grow quickly, as we said, to be able to fly. And there's that route again, 3,000 miles. And so we're there. We drove by bus for about 3 hours, and we got up to where we were going to get on a boat. It was really foggy that morning. And as we were waiting for the boat, this crowd gathered. And they were looking and staring at us. And I asked one of the interpreters about that, and he said, well, for a generation, hardly any foreigners have ever come to this part of China. And you can see the drab Mao kind of costumes that they're wearing. They would look on, usually with a rather sober expression. But if you kind of singled one out and caught eye contact and smiled and waved a little bit, they would respond in kind. So it was just a kind of an eerie experience because the fog is all around us. And here's this group of people that are intensely curious about us. It's pretty neat. And we got on the boat, and what do you know? I said, there's cormorant fishing. And George says, I thought you said you didn't know any birds. I said, that was in Bozo and the Bird record, Bozo the Clown. And here I could see this. And there's success by one of the cormorants, but he can't swallow it because they have a piece of twine around the bird's neck and it won't go down. He's struggling to get it down. They pull him into the boat, they dump out the fish, and they feed him some parts of fish and they send him back. They are fierce predators. They get more fish than the people who are out there throwing nets. And here you can see that that competitor, the eyes and that hooked beak. They can go down and dive to 120 feet in standard water to 80 seconds. And underwater, they can really fly much better than in the air. Their wings do not, after a while, they have to get out and dry their wings off because they don't have the oils to protect the wings. So they get too heavy and they would just sink. So they have to dry those off. As we were going out to see Lake Boyang, where the cranes were, we saw all these peasants and they were working hard. This guy's got, I tried that. I picked that up myself and it really bit into my shoulders on both sides. That's wet clay that he's carrying and he's walking up the hills with it. And they're doing this from when we would leave early in the morning until we got back around twilight. You saw all these people up and down taking soil out of the riverbed, because this is one of those dried up river, monsoon rivers, and then carrying it up on the dike up above. Because when the monsoons hit, this river will flood and it could damage the crops if they don't keep the dikes up. And I asked him, I said, you know, I've seen a lot of machinery here. You know, you have payloaders and you have diggers and you have trucks. Why aren't they doing this? And he said, well, these are farmers and this is the off season. This is winter for them. And we have to feed them anyway. So, you know, they might as well be doing this and then we can save the fuel for the mechanical diggers. So here we see in the way China has worked for for thousands of years. You get a huge mass of people and they're all working at a project. They can do stuff like this. So then we kept walking and we got to this bank and we could hear the cranes on the other side and we crawled up the bank and now George is looking, he's centered here and he's looking out and he sees more cranes that not to exist. And here's what we saw. 1,500, remember he thought there was 620. 1,500 cranes all together. He thought they and they're all feeding in this marshy remnant of Lake Boyang. So they're a long way out. And these guys all have their spotting scopes. And I've got a spotting scope too. And they're saying, oh, look at this one, you know. And they would describe it, and all I saw was a white dot. So I looked around and I saw one of the officials along with us. Everybody seemed to be going up and consulting with them. So I walked over and I asked who he was, and he was the Minister of the Interior for Natural Resources for all of China. So I went over and I told George, you better talk to this guy. He's the big guy there. And he did, and George and I decided that I would watch the cranes whenever I wanted, but I would go around and give talks to schools and village councils and so forth about the cranes. Because again, it's not the cranes that save themselves, it's people that save them. They have to understand they're valuable resources. They can fly at 30 miles an hour, but what you'll see on their 3,000 mile migration is they'll find a thermal, which is rising warm air, and they'll just glide going around in circles and ride that thermal up as high as it will take them. And then they glide down and until they can find another thermal. But if they have to flap their wings, they're capable of that as well. The crane, if you ever see something flying above, it's a big bird and it flies with its Its beak pointed out, straight neck, and the legs pointed back. That's a crane. It's the only one that flies that way. So, I mean, you know, 1,500 white cranes, and those are black flight feathers that they have on the tips of their wings. But you get 1,500 of those flying overhead. And I mean, it's just really exciting. It was really beautiful. And of course, they make this throaty call. You probably heard sandhills. That's pretty much the way the Siberian crane calls as well. Siberian is much taller than the sandhills. It's a much bigger bird. So here we have a hero of the cranes, He Shuang Guan. He really liked the cranes, but he saw that people were going out in boats and they would have a pipe, long pipe, and they would pack gunpowder into one end and then all kinds of shrapnel in the other. And they would aim it at all these valuable birds and shoot it. And then they would pick up the dead birds and take them to the market to sell. And cranes have one thing that doesn't help them. They taste good. And so he got a law passed once they found out the cranes are valuable. The municipal area and the provincial area outlawed cannon hunting. And they had just caught, according to them, they had just caught somebody doing that. And he was going to spend a year in jail. I mean, they really were treating it seriously. He Shuang is the smaller guy. The other one's an interpreter with us. So here's a Siberian crane. He's bald on his head and the skin is bright red. And the rest of his feathers are white except for the flight feathers. When he extends his wings, then you can see that black on his flight feathers. And they spend the day probing in the shallows, looking for anything that they can eat. Sedge grass is one of their staples. That they eat the root. They'll pull the grass out. They'll snip off the grass part, and they'll swallow the tuber. And here you can see clams that we could find. They had holes in them because they have very strong beaks, and they could break the clam and eat the soft inside. Well, we stayed there for 11 nights doing this stuff. And this is the bed. You can see that softwood mattress there. They do not, if you're south of the Yangtze, they do not believe in heat during the summer. It was foggy and it was right around 35, 34, 33 degrees every night. And that was where you ate. That was when you went to take a shower or, you ate. There was no place that was really warm. And Sture Carlson from Sweden was my partner here in the room, and we both. I said, Sture, you're from Sweden, you should know. And so he said, well, put both quilts on top of you. So we did, and that night we got up and put everything in our luggage on to get warm. And the next day they said, no, you put one of the quilts below and the other one over you, and that makes kind of like a sleeping blanket, blanket. So we did that, and that helped. And we said, we still want a heater. Oh, yes, we can do that, they said. So below you see the heater, which is a shallow metal pan with a few glowing charcoal. So Sture and I would sit with our stock cranes, and oh man, I was really feeling bummed when we got to the boat after the 10-kilometer walk back to the boat. People said, oh, you really look sick, and I said, I really feel that way. And then we hit a sandbar, and there are no radios on the boat, of course, and so the crew took about an hour getting us off the sandbar. And they said, do you want a doctor? And I said, yeah, I better have one. They said, do you want a Chinese doctor or do you want a Western? I said, well, I've always had Western doctors, give you a Chinese one. So here's my doctor. She's making notes, telling her, and the guy sitting there is the hospital administrator. And she says, well, we'll use acupuncture. And so she was here, she's putting some in my stomach area, and I had some in my legs, I had some in my shoulders. And it's just really, I'd never had acupuncture before, of course. And the only English that she knew was tender, tender. And you would say no. And then all of a sudden you say, yeah, yeah. And then she's good. You know, then she'd go to the next one. Every 5 minutes she'd wiggle them. And if they was still tender, that was good. If it wasn't, she would probe and find a tender spot. Next morning I was fine. Now it was either that or it was the pills she had me take, I don't know. But I was enjoying the experience, and I had many of the members of our group in to watch it as well. So here's George Archibald. George Archibald, he's shining pictures on the wall. There is no electricity in this village. There was a couple of generators, and that was it. So they had never seen anything like this. And you can see that's an ancient slide projector. George is having a good time. So the people here in the village, you can see the screen that's tied up on the wall, and they got to see the white cranes that they'd never seen them before. This was really popular. And, you know, this is all made possible by visiting the Siberian cranes. Here's the new dentist who I had met before, and he came over to my lodgings to especially grab me on a Sunday. And he said, oh, I'm having a grand opening of my new dentist's office. And so he showed me, there was a dental chair, and off to the right, you see the foot-driven drill. And I don't know about you, but I'm old enough. I had one of those slow drills with no Novocaine, and it would go chunk, chunk, and you would see the smoke coming out of your mouth. And as a kid, I really am not comfortable with dentists even now. I hear a dental drill and I go, you know, it's, I had 3 crowns come out while I was in China. I just had them put in, and there was a faulty adhesive. I did not have that taken care of. I put them in a film container and brought them home. So I went around to schools and village councils in the area and gave lectures. I showed some pictures of the cranes, talked about the US a little bit, taught a little about English, and you can see welcome, and it had Mr. Lohr with the H and the R turned around, but that's okay. So now there's about 2,900 cranes, but they are dependent on the Russian tundra and Lake Boyang. And China is considered damming Lake Boyang to keep the water in it year long. So that would endanger a major habitat for them during the winter. And we don't know what would happen. And so we have to be concerned about them. We had a television crew with us at all times. They were always happy and laughing, and they would take films of us doing certain things. And I'm sure they made a documentary about it. So we may be on Chinese television at 2 o'clock in the mornings now when they're searching for documentaries to show. So this is Vietnam, 1985. And George gave me a ring. That's 1989. George gave me a ring, and he said, do you want to go on another trip? And I said, no, I've got the golf course now, and I'm really busy. I can't do that anymore. And he said, well, we're going to a spot that you said would be very interested in. And I said, where? And he said, Vietnam. I said, well, I'll work it out. So my father had to do the spring opening of Pine Valley Golf Course. And we landed in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City up in the upper right, and took a long car ride, really bumpy roads, to where the blue arrow shows. And that was the village of Tram Chim, which is a bird sanctuary. And so that's where we were going to be for our time here in Vietnam. So here's an elderly Vietnam fellow, and you just think of the history that he's lived through. They were a French colony at one point. In World War II, the Japanese occupied, they were French, yeah, colony first, and then the Japanese took over and actually let the French run the colony until right near the end when they took over the French as well. And then after World War II, Ho Chi Minh wanted to liberate all of Vietnam. He was a nationalist leader. And the French and the US and others did not want that to happen. And so Vietnam was split between a North and a South. After the French Indochina War, it was just in 1954, I remember my mother having me listen to the radio and read the news about Dien Bien Phu, where a French army of around 20,000 was trapped in northern, actually Laos, in this war, trapped by the Viet Minh. And every day they would say the perimeter of that area of the French would shrink. And we followed that until finally the French surrendered. And then the Vietnam was split into North and South. And the South, there began an uprising, a revolution against the government. And the communists who did that in the South and asked North Vietnam to help. And the South Vietnamese, we were helping them anyway. And then we got pulled into it. So it was the revolutionary Viet Cong in South Vietnam with the help of the North Vietnamese army against the US Army and several of our allies. Of course, that was from 1965 to 1973 when we bowed out. Then Vietnam was unified, and then shortly after they had a war with Cambodia, communist Cambodia. And a little bit later, they had a war with communist China. And we were involved there because we didn't want Vietnam, Cambodia, and China all to be one under the communists. So, wow, history takes strange turns. This is the Saurus cranes, and they are the tallest. They'll look you right in the eye. I'm 5'11", and they're around 6 feet. So I can just about look them right in the eye. These are tall birds, a little less dramatically colored. The Saurus cranes survived by fleeing to Cambodia's Great Lake, Tonle Sap, during the war in Vietnam. And when the war shifted to Cambodia, then they flew back to Vietnam. Back in the Delta in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, we had patrol boats going up and down the waters of the Mekong Delta. And Viet Cong and North Vietnamese will hide in the bushes and ambush our boats. And our boats were bulletproof. I mean, the patrol boats that they used had aluminum hulls and so forth. So they were killing a lot of our sailors. So Admiral Zumwalt ordered the area sprayed with Agent Orange and other defoliants. So you have this rich growth in this wetland, massive wetland area of Vietnam along the Mekong River. The vegetation was destroyed. Of course, you sprayed the people as well and other things. And actually, I'll go back, Admiral Zumwalt's son was one of them that got sprayed and later got a cancer. And they wrote a book, My Father, My Son, which detailed Admiral Zumwalt's decision and then his son getting the cancer that was most likely caused by the spray. The Sea of Reeds is what this area was called. There was a lot of growth, a lot of wetland, and we dug trenches to dry it out. We sprayed it so that nothing would grow there. And there was sulfur in the water, in the earth, and now it gets concentrated. So now if it rains, then that water becomes sulfuric oxide. When it's an acid that actually will lead off any new growth. So what happened here? Moy Ney, the former Viet Cong colonel, he saved the wetlands. He dammed the drainage canals to reflood the area. And without that, there would be no Mekong Delta today. And here he's standing with George Archibald. And we had meetings with him. They gave me an interpreter because I was going to go around and give talks. This is Sang. He's toasting you right now. He was a guy on the streets. My interpreter they gave me, I could barely understand, and she could barely understand me. So I met Sang on the street, and we were talking, and his English was very good, and I hired him for $3 a day because then he really knew English very well. And the guy sitting next to him is a North Vietnamese Army person, and those two would not communicate with each other at all. And George told me at one time, he said, well, tonight at supper, right after supper, you give a question on Vietnam War. And I said, wow, these people have all been in it. We had US Army, we had US State Department with us. People had all been there. And of course, the Viet Cong, we had North Vietnamese, and we had ARVN, which would be our allies in South. And so George says, no, you go and do it. So I kind of gave an outline and asked these guys to comment, and you could just see the sweat popping out of some of their foreheads because it was dangerous. I mean, this was a dictatorship, and you had to watch what you said. It was one of the most intense teaching experiments I've ever had, but it was really, really fascinating. And the State Department person from the US later said, you know, I was only there for a couple of years. I never looked at the full history of the overview. And she said, wow, she really enjoyed that experience. So I also went out into the farming area, and this is a farmer's hut. And the farmers, and here you can see Sang is sitting behind me. I'm taking some notes. And that is the kitchen table, the bamboo mat. We did have somebody from our group once that walked across the mat, and you just don't do that. That is the kitchen table. And but these farmers were telling me the hard lives that they had. This area did not grow rice well, but the government really wanted them to be there, so they gave them a negative income tax. They paid them to stay and grow rice. Of course, they didn't pay them much, so they were really struggling. And then, as they plowed, much of the ordnance that we dropped on Vietnam fell into these rice paddies, and they didn't explode because it didn't have anything solid. And so these guys, you know, they run into the mines, and this guy was showing me where he got hit by shrapnel, and his oxen was killed. It's really sad stories of that. This is a survivor, Van Ngoc Linh, and she was a Chinese person who was a citizen of Cambodia. And of course, when Cambodia began the killing fields, they didn't want Chinese ancestry, you know, anybody with Chinese ancestry there. So they marched them off into the countryside, into big prison areas, and worked them to death, basically. And she watched her brother get strung up by his feet because he was getting dysentery and he couldn't work. And he died. She had to bury him by hand, and she would sneak out and go to see her parents in a neighboring farm. And one day they were gone, and so she and a friend gathered some bundles of reeds and floated down the river past the Vietnamese guards, or the Cambodian killing field guards, floated down into Vietnam. And then they were put into a refugee camp. The guard really liked her, and so they got married. These are her kids. And the husband goes off and drinks most of the time, and she has to make the money to feed the kids and feed the family. Pretty sad story. This is the doctor at Tram Chin Village. And he told me that really made me feel, really reflect. You're doing more for the cranes than anything has been done for the people here. And that was really a telling story. There was nothing in his hospital. I didn't see any kinds of medicines or anything. This is the operating table. It looks a lot cleaner than it was. And while I was there, a boy was rushed in that had been hit by a motorcycle, and his parents came as well, and they were sitting on a bench outside, and the doctor excused himself, and I was looking around at other things. And then the doctor came back out and talked to the parents, and they started to cry. And he walked over to me, and I said, "No, I think you better spend your time." He said there just was no chance. The child died, but a rather dramatic moment to be there. In Tram Chim Village, Father Lin, this is his new church, and the communist government of Tram Chin brought us there to show what they're doing for religion. This is new. It's 1989 it was there. This is 1987. And Father Lin is looking very proud. This is why they had to build a new one. Even the statue of Mary was shot up, but the old church, of course, was destroyed. And then as we were leaving, Father Lin gave a little tug on my shirt and he whispered, "I speak English." And so we all went out and we went back into town, and another person and I snuck back around, and we came to the church, and he posted guards, and we went into his office and he gave us communion. And then he started to cry and he said, "I can stand it here, I've got to get out." And he gave us a fellow priest that he knew in Ohio. So later I wrote him a letter and said, "Father Lin really wants to get out of that town." And he wrote back saying, well, he took a vow and his parishioners can't leave. He just has to make the best of it. Very dramatic story. This Catholic sister was sitting at a kind of a regional meeting, and there were communist officials all around us. And she said, "Oh, these communists, they don't know what they're doing. They're terrible." And I said, "Well, they're all around you. Aren't you afraid?" She said, "Oh, they don't know English," she said. And she said something in Vietnamese, and they all laughed and smiled. And she said, "I just told them that I was telling you how many improvements have come to our village because of their leadership." So she was really feisty. And the Buddhist monastery, you can see, is pretty neglected. And here was a priest saying, "Oh, for years you'd throw garbage and there was some stones over the walls. And once in a while people would break in and they would beat me up." And he said, "It's been terrible. Now it's getting a little better." But he was certainly put upon. And here's the Cao Dai nun. And I thought the Cao Dai, which was a syncretic religion of Christianity and various Asian religions all put together. And when Ngo Dinh Diem took over in South Vietnam with our help, he attacked the Cao Dai, and I thought it wiped them out. But somebody said, "Oh no, there's a nun over in a monastery over here." And so it was Sunday afternoon. I talked a person with a car to take us, and some of the other people from our group went, and we pulled onto the road, and we were stopped by a policeman, a Vietnamese policeman. He says, well, we told him where we were going because we had to. And then he says, "I'm going with you." And he jumped into our car. So here I'm interviewing the Cao Dai nun, and she's looking over at the policeman. And I'm sure if she can tell what she wants to tell me, if that's going to be okay. So very leery. And look at the bright-eyed kids around her. So I also went and talked in elementary schools, and here the kids are all lined up, showing them pictures. And it's the lady that you see with the straps around her neck, that was my Vietnamese interpreter, whom I couldn't really understand. So she took part along with the kids. And when you looked around, you saw eyes in all the walls. And I had to take a picture of it because these people were looking through the walls, because they hadn't seen slides before, and they hadn't seen, I had a lecture before. And so I talked to these young kids. The next day, Sung and I went to a high school. Wait, this is the other way around. I'm sorry. First day I went to a high school and I told stories. The next day I went to an elementary school, to this one, and I would tell a brief, simplified part of the story, and Sung would talk on and on and on. And so the next day I said, "What were you doing?" And he said, "Well, you forgot all those stories you told yesterday." So they got the full brunt of the high school talk anyway. And these are teachers who, they said this was a hardship post, and they had all of their bills paid if they would take this hardship post for 5 years. And I said, "Well, how long have you guys been here?" 10 years, 12 years, so forth. I said, "What happened?" They said, "Well, once we're here, you're here." They were just given a deal to get here. And so they've been there for quite a while. So this is from a postcard now. This is the way Tram Chim National Park, it's been created. And it's a wetland of international importance. And you can see how Vietnamese regard it. So the SARS cranes are doing quite well. And thank you to the Vietnam crane ornithologists and the ICF. So I also went to Bhutan to take a look at the blackneck cranes, and there's the Himalaya mountains in the background. And this was International Crane Foundation expedition with George Archibald again. And there in the red, you can see where Bhutan is, less than 1 million people. It's between India and China, and has always pretty much been left alone, but now there's pressure on both borders. The Chinese are expanding their interests in Asia, and India is interested in not doing that to Bhutan, becoming a Chinese vassal state. So it's getting to be a place of international contention. So this is the home of the Himalayan mountain range. The highest peak in Bhutan is over 24,000 feet. Chumalunga, or Mount Everest in Tibet, is 29 feet or something like that. So this is about 5,000 short of that. This I took off a poster. This is Bhutan's 5th king. He had just got married. And as you can see, they're a very good young couple. And never did get to see him while we were there. Bhutan has become famous because its prime minister has, King Wanchuk, developed the gross happiness index. And so instead of by gross national product, what you produce, they were measuring the country by good governance, sustainable development, cultural preservation, and environment conservation. And so you can still find those ratings if you look them up online. The Scandinavian countries come very highly rated according to that measure, as does Bhutan. It's self-sufficient in food production, rice, and you can see the terraces here. Lots of work to put this together. And here they're cutting and taking in the rice, and you can see that's hand labor. Not everything is really good from Bhutan. They did have an era of ethnic cleansing where they kicked out the Nepalese who had lived in Bhutan for generations. They just kicked them out, and they tried to get into Nepal, and the Nepalese wouldn't let them in. So they're still in refugee camps in India, and nobody will take them in. So there's a sad story. Bhutan really ought to let them back into Bhutan, but that doesn't seem to be in the cards. We were on these mountain roads. You can read the narrow road, drive slow. Well, you take a look at the road up ahead you there. And then you have the falling rock sign, dangerous I hope they're just kidding, but no, this is really a narrow road, and it drops off like a half a mile down. It was really exciting. I rode in the front. We all took turns riding in the front because nobody after a while wanted to do it. It was so frightening. Here, this truck had come around the corner, and we're supposed to drive on the side of him, and I just couldn't see that we would fit there. And we're not slowing down, neither is he. And that those rocks along, that's all between you and the sheer drop. And here we're a little bit closer. So impressed, I had to take pictures of this. So I've never seen a sign like this in the mountain road. Road sinking ahead. So therefore you have to drive slow. This was a real experience, just driving across Bhutan. And how far down is it? Well, you can see here, sheer drops often. And there's the road on the other side, some vehicles. And because the running water divides up this area of the Himalayas, they can't afford to have bridges you can drive across. And so they did make some of these swinging bridges. One was the second longest in the world. And I grew up in Marathon City, and the Rib River is crossed by a swinging bridge right down below Marathon City. It's still there. It had signs that it was dangerous when I was a kid playing on it, and it still does, but it still exists. So we're there to see the black-necked cranes. Where are they? They're not there. They're supposed to be there because, this is a time of year they show up. So we were looking, and we took a little rest at noon, and we were looking up in the air, and here came 3 black-necked cranes circling down, and there they are, landed. So they've just arrived. George's prediction was right on that we would see them. And there are about 500 of them that come to Bhutan in the summer. They come from the plateau of Tibet. And this is where they spend their summer. They're endangered because of loss of habitat to farms and wires strung across the flyways. And Tibet especially is draining the swamps and the wetlands to create more farmland. So here's George. He's addressing a black-necked crane festival. This is at a local school. And here are the kids. They're all dressed up. And here's the local farmer who was the crane hero. And he had on his crane hat. But for most of his life, he kept very accurate records of the number of cranes that would show in this valley. And so he does that now. The ICF hired him to do that, but he did it on his own for many years. And here he's giving a talk to the kids as well. And kids doing a crane dance. And then we had to judge their artwork and give prizes. And for me, this is, the guy who used Bozo and the clown and the birds. We learned about the white-bellied heron, that there are only 40 individuals left in Bhutan and 200 in the world. And I came over this bank and I saw one. This is one of the rarest birds in the world. And I got this picture that I took. This is not out of a book or a poster. That's my picture. I'm very proud of it. And, but the day before, if we weren't schooled on what white-bellied crane or herons were, I never would have known what I was seeing. But I got all excited on this one. And of course, you show the Himalayas, you have to show yaks. And we would drive up into the snowy mountains and then back down to the semi-tropical valleys all in one day, many days. Jongs are fortress monasteries in Bhutan. And this is the tiger's lair or tiger's nest, way up in the mountains. You were over 10,000 feet and you had to climb 1,700 feet at that altitude some on winding paths and then on steps. And by the time you got up, I was glad I was in pretty good shape. I worked out at the Y every day, and I was happy I did that because I was winded. I was really tired. So this is not a crane trip, but it's an Earthwatch trip in Kenya. I did see some cranes, the African crown crane, I think one of the most beautiful. I saw them in this wetland. I was walking with some other people. We were doing some birding. Kenya's one of the countries with the largest variety of birds. So I started sneaking up on them and got behind some bushes. And then I was crawling, and then I was inching up to get this picture. And kids were back with my group back on the road, and they were laughing and imitating what I was doing. And they said they really had a ball watching me. But I got these really, really nice pictures of the African crown crane. And then we went to the Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska on the Platte River. This is a blind. And this is where, on the Platte, where the cranes gather up to 500,000. And we were with the Crane Foundation. I was with George again. And you could look out at all of these cranes. It was amazing. And they like that shallow water and to roost in. And then each day they fly off to glean grain from the fields around. So when 500,000 cranes at a time take off all at once, it's really a sight and a sound because they make a lot of noise. And here's some dancing. And this is a sunset. These are coming back in to roost. And you get that red sunset on it. You know, it's just an amazing sight. It's a key species on just about all they're like the canaries in a mine. Where cranes are healthy, wetlands are healthy. When they're endangered, wetlands are endangered. And once the wetlands go, our source of fresh water is shrunk. It's just, you want to maintain your wetlands. And these are the birds that are helping because they are so photogenic. They are so popular among people that people agree to save areas so they have habitat. Again, you can see the feet strung out behind, the beak leading, straight neck. That is a crane. And then we were just at the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. We were just before the shutdown for COVID, and we were there in February. And Corpus Christi, Texas is right where it's located. And 504 whooping cranes come down and spend their winter in Aransas. The eastern migratory has the whooping cranes from Wisconsin, as well as some that are bred. So eastern migratory flock, 14 are wild bred and 71 were bred in Baraboo. Long, dangerous flight again. They're a very big, tall bird from Alberta and Northwest Territories down to Aransas. And this is where off at San Antonio Bay and Copano Bay and Aransas Bay is where they winter. And this is up in Wood Buffalo National Park in Canada. And you can see the two white standing out. They mate, they stay together for life. They can live up to 30 years. They're omnivorous. They're always pecking, walking and pecking. Eat roots, seeds, plants, small animals like frogs, fish, snakes. Blue crabs down in Texas are one of their favorite foods. And this snake was rather unlucky. They'll eat just about anything they can catch. And on Wisconsin Public Radio had on their website, they had the information that the Crane Foundation's grand opening was delayed. So Give a whoop. Help a crane. And that's the end of this talk. Hope you enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Wonderful talk. Thank you.
If you want to you can unshare your screen if you'd like. And then if anyone has any questions, I'm going